Okay, everyone, let's get started. My name is Sam. I'm the tech director at Hack at UCI. Ironically, I should have been able to know how to get this working, but sorry for the technical difficulties. So this workshop is on Firebase, the perfect all-in-one toolchain. And why do I call it perfect? Because it is. First of all, it's developed by Google. Second thing, it's what's called as a backend as a service. So basically it provides a lot of external services like authentication, database storage, file storage, all sorts of stuff that will be useful when you're developing your web applications. This workshop is going to be on React and Firebase. So what is React? React is just a front-end JavaScript framework. How many of you are using, or how many of you are developing a web application right now for VH? Are you using React? Yes. So you know what I mean when I say it's one of the most popular front-end JavaScript frameworks out there, right? Just for background knowledge, it's developed by Meta, or used to be Facebook at the time, and now it's Meta, of course, as many of you know. And then we also have Firebase. So I already said this, but it's a backend as a service. And again, it provides services such as authentication, file storage, and a lot more. If you've been learning React on your own, many of you have probably seen the to-do list example. Yes, that's what we'll be going through today. Because that's not the main focus of this workshop. The main focus of this workshop is to teach you guys Firebase. So we're given a to-do list application already. You want to go to this top link right here. And we want to incorporate email and password authentication. And also, we want to be able to store to-dos for each user's account, right? So there are two links right here. The first one is just if you want to type along or follow along with me as I code. And then this one here is just to the finished code. So if you don't want to type or anything of the sort, then just, well, look at this one. Okay, so what I want you to do first is go to GitHub, create a fork of this repository so that when you if you want to make changes and make your own repository and push changes to it, you don't push to the one I have right now, because that'll cause some conflicts. Yeah. Yes.
To the workshops panels that would be...
Yeah. Sorry, I will do that right now. Randy, do you have Slack open? Actually, no, never mind. I can workshops channel. Okay, that should be a link. Okay. Does anyone want to use a second link? Okay, then I won't put it in the chat. Once you make a fork of the repo, just clone it to your machine, then run npm install. I'll wait until everyone is done. Yes. The second link, yes. Yeah, you can just put, can you put in Slack? I don't know. Can you open your Slack real quick? Just put in workshops. Yeah, second link posted. Does anyone need help with setup so far, or how many of you are already done? Okay, I'll wait for a little bit. Anyone need help with anything, or are we good to go? You good? So, what would you like help with?
So join the terminal, press the run button.
Oh, yeah, so it's done, right? So if you do an LS, you should see the new folder right now. So you just change the directory. The project. Okay. You have notes. No. NTF is basically like a so like if in order for the application to work, you need to download like third-party code onto your computer, right? And that is it. So I want you to do install Node.js. And then there's the annotation window that's on. And then you can read download it. Right. Anyone else need help? Let's move on then, because we are running out of time. So the main features, again, we want user accounts and authentication, so logging in, logging out. And we want to make this a little bit more special. We want to limit access to users that aren't logged in, right? So basically you want to say, just say like, hey, you are not logged in, make sure you log in before you can actually write to-dos to your account. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier, we want to save to-dos by user. So for example, if let's say I have my own account, I want to-dos to be saved to my account. And when I log in, I want to be able to view my own to-dos instead of anybody else's, right? So quick application structure. We have 4 pages. So this one's obviously homepage. They're kind of self-explanatory. And then this is a component, right? So the difference, or I should explain what a component is first, for those of you who don't know. So a component is basically just a section of reusable JavaScript code that you can use throughout different parts of your application. It's technically a little bit similar to HTML, but it's not exactly the same. We'll go over that later. But basically that we have just these 4 pages, and then this one will just contain, or will render all the to-do lists or all the to-dos for a user onto the web page. And then for our database structure, we have our to-dos, like our overall to-dos for each user, followed by some emails, like example users, for example, this would be so Peter and Eater, of course. And then for each user, we have a whole bunch of to-dos associated with them, right? So for example, it's like just to-do 1, to-do 2, and so on for each user. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. All right, not yet, but let's go over to VS Code. Yeah, I'll let Randy take care of that. I'm sorry. Hey, maybe you should just sit next to you. Yeah. Yeah, keep clone the read. Okay. Third tab. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's maximize the window. All right, can anyone see in the back? Okay, cool. So let's go over to, I want to point out this specific file here, Firebase.js. I don't care if you forget anything else. If you forget everything else, I want you to remember this file right here, because this is where all of your Firebase configurations go. Now you can structure your application arbitrarily or however you want, right? Because as long as it's inside this main FRC folder on the top. It's just that I have my specific preferences. I would like to put Firebase.js here. And mainly so I can organize all my JavaScript files better. So what is in here? This is a lot of code, but I'll try to explain it step by step. So let's look at line 1 first. There's just, lines 1 from 16. There are a bunch of imports here. But hopefully they seem to be a little bit familiar, because the first one is just for overall Firebase. According to Firebase documentation, you need to import this specific function. and then use it later in order to initialize your application properly, right? I'll explain what that means later. These next few imports are from Firebase authentication. So for example, well, I mean, I think the function names can speak for themselves. One of them is just get authentication. One of them is create user, sign in, sign out. And then of course, on-off state changed. We'll be using on-off state change a lot, mainly to track whether a user is logged in or not. And then finally, these last few imports are for our database, Cloud Firestore. So basically, we want to be able to get specific to-dos for a user and be able to render them on a page. That's what these functions are for. Now let's move down here. I want you to pay attention to this. This is where when you go onto Firebase, so for example, if I go to Firebase. Wait, what am I doing? Oh, did I switch to keyboards? I switched keyboards. Sorry. Okay, if I go to firebase.google.com and I go to console, I can create a new project. Once you create a new project, you'll end up with a new sample configuration. Let's go through creating a project real quick. So when you create a project, you'll see Firebase will tell you to export this section of JavaScript code and copy and paste it into your own code. And what does that mean? It basically just tells you to, it'll give you like this dictionary where it has these specific keys, and then the values are whatever you store in here. So all of these are just like stored in, well, I actually don't have it on me right now. I don't have the .env file. This is great. This is really great. Need to send the .env file. What? Oh, that's true. Shoot, I didn't take this into consideration, but when let's move back to the Firebase thing. So once we've created our new project, we can go into hosting. Get started. Okay. This might not be the right thing. Okay. So let's go to settings first. I'll talk about how to get the configuration. So you go to settings, you want to scroll down to the bottom where it says there are no apps in your project. Then what you want to do is click this code symbol here. It's basically saying you want to create a new web application. So you click this, we create a new app. So example app. We don't need to set up Firebase hosting unless you want to. You want to deploy you want to host your web application on Firebase. For now, we can just skip that. Okay. So right here are the instructions I was talking about before. So you want to make sure Firebase is installed on your project folder in your project directory. So you want to run npm Firebase first. And then afterwards, you want to, this is the code snippet I was talking about earlier. So you want to copy this and paste this in a file. Right. So I'll give everyone some time to do that. So I have my own .env file that stores all of the environment variables for all my configurations. So once Randy finishes importing it, I will explain what it means. Which one's it called? Yeah. Where is it? We'll see it there. Okay, cool. All right. So is everyone done with the step, or does anyone need help? Okay, can I get a raise of hands who's actually following along right now? Okay, cool. Once you copy this configuration, you can either leave this here or put it in an environment variable folder. It doesn't really matter. And you might think that's a little bit insecure, but that's actually fine. Like the majority of the tutorials out there leave this in a public viewable space, right? Mainly because Firebase needs these variables to be public in order for your application to be able to interact with it, right? So let's go back to VS Code. Basically what I do is I store all my values and stuff. You saw those like super long strings on the right hand side. I store them in a .env file. And basically what that means is instead of just copy and pasting the values, I save them or I assign them variables, and then I use them in my code here, right? This is for extra information, I use Vite in this application, which is a lot faster than create React app for those of you that are wondering. And so in order to use environment variables in Vite, you just say import.meta.env, and then Vite you want to make sure that in order to use them, your environment variables must be prefixed with Vite underscore. Otherwise it won't work. So once we're done with the configuration, we want to initialize our Firebase app. So we call the initialize app function that I mentioned on the very first line, this one here. And then we want to pass in our Firebase configuration as an argument, right? It's kind of intuitive. You want to pass your configuration into this function in order to be able to initialize your application correctly. Then what we want to do is call, now once the application is set up, we also want to set up authentication and connections to our authentication and database services. So that is what the get auth and get firestore functions are for. We want to call get auth on our app, and we also want to call get firestore on our app, and that returns variables or connectors to our authentication database respectively. Once we're done with that, we want to be able to export these so we can use all these variables in other files. So this is what the super long export statement is for. We want to export, so like I said, we want to export these so we can use them in other files, and I'll show you how to use them as we go along. Okay. Let's go to let's pull this file. Okay. Let's start off with login. Let's set up some authentication first. So I have a web page called login. Basically what it does is there's a login form that asks the user for their username and their password. Self-explanatory. But actually the web page won't work as is right now. But basically what we want to do is, follow this instruction here, right? So what we want to do is to store whether a user is logging in or creating an account, right? Because you need to create an account first in order to be able to save your to-dos, right? So let's do that first. False. True. Right. So by default, is usually for most websites, when you click log in, you go to a login page. You're not actually creating an account, right? So what this is for is saying, when the web page loads, I want this to assume that you're logging in. That's what this state variable is for, right? And if a user decides to create an account, then we should call this set is login function and change the state so that we render the appropriate components for creating an account, right? So basically, this is most of the code here. We do a conditional rendering, right? So based on whether this value is true, we render this JSX or JavaScript. And if isLogin is false, then we want to render the code for creating an account. As you can see up here, we're creating an account, right? So I've created most of the form already. You can look at the code and ask questions if ask questions to me later if you're confused about it. But what we want to do, or what we want to focus on, is this handle submit function here. And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to take what's stored in here, right? Because I've made it so whenever a user types in information, it automatically updates the values here. So let's take care of that first. So again, we want to make sure whether a user is logging in or not, right? So let's do a conditional. So if a user is logging in, we want to be able to log them in, right? So notice how I've imported this function called sign in with email and password. Super long name, I know, but that's just how Firebase is sometimes. We want to sign in with their email and password. Now, let's see. There is something we have to do before that, though. Notice how this E is passing as an argument. That's basically passing an event in. When we submit a form, it calls a function, right? Now it has a default action. The default action is to send the values that you submit to a different page, or if you just leave it by default, the current page, right? It'll send it to the current page so that assuming that it'll process the data and then do something with it. But we don't want to do that. We want to control that ourselves. So what we want to do is say e.prevent default. This basically just prevents that from happening and allows us to take control so that when we submit, we can do whatever we want. So then what do we want to do? We want to be able to sign in, right? So we want to sign in with email and password. So recall that I exported an authentication object, a reference to our Firebase authentication. So we want to pass this into our sign in and email with password function, along with the username or email, I'm sorry, email and password, right? Because you need those in order to log in. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see the entire line. Can everyone still see this in the back? Okay. So I'll wait for everyone to type that up. But once we sign in, we want to be able to do something with it. Generally, what happens is that we just want to redirect the user to the home page. So let's do that real quick. So we want to be able to execute some sort of code after this finishes, right? Because what happens if a user signs in with incorrect credentials? We don't want to assume that they're logged in and redirect them to the home page, right? That's not what we want to do. So instead, there's a .then method that we can call that takes in a function. So it takes in a user credential, and then we can execute some code within that function. Now, I've installed an additional library called React-Router-DOM, so React-Router-DOM, and that allows navigation between different pages on our React app. So for example, I have add to do, home, login, and log out. I made it so that you can navigate in between each page properly by installing React-Router-DOM. And React-Router-DOM exports this function called navigate, or use navigate here. what we're going to do with this is call use navigate first, say that to a variable, and then just call it navigate to the home page or slash. Right. So what this will do is on sign in, if on a successful sign in, we'll just be redirected to the home page or just slash. Right. Pretty self-explanatory. Otherwise, if the user is logs in with incorrect credentials, then it's up to you how you want to handle it. For now, I've just console log the error. Please don't do this in your projects. Make sure just for user like experience and user like good user principles. You want to render like some sort of message box or whatever to tell the user like, oh, you did something wrong, please fix it, right? Because otherwise the user won't know what's up. Okay. So that's a sign-in part. Are there any questions? Okay, it's 37. Otherwise, if the user is not logging in, that means they're creating an account. So what we want to do is I've imported another function called create user with email and password. So you need a longer function name. But let's copy this and call that function. It's basically the same exact format. So again, we pass in the auth object, pass in the email, we pass in the password. The only difference now is that instead of just signing in a user, it creates a new account and it just registers it to your Firebase application. So again, we want to be able to redirect the user to the home page upon successful creation of your account, right? So again, it passes in a user credential. And then we just want to navigate again to the home page. Otherwise, there may be some sort of error when they're creating an account. And then we just want to console log again. Again, please don't console log, display some sort of message. And yeah, you can choose to do whatever you want with this user credential. It's just an object that contains some attributes like email, user ID, and stuff like that. But what I've chosen to do is just, just navigate to the home page. So I'll let everyone take a few moments to type that down. Okay. Cool. Is everyone done? Okay. Let's move on to the home page now. Actually, let's do the logout function first, since that's probably the better thing to do. The sign out is actually a lot simpler. We just want to literally sign the user out. So it's very simple. What we want to do is, or actually, before I say anything else, you saw this use effect last time, or this use effect function last time, in the other file that I was typing in earlier. Basically, what this use effect function does is once that HTML-like code displays on the screen, it'll call this function first. So basically, you use use effect for API calls. In my case, I'm using it for Firebase stuff, for fetching data, anything that you need it for, right? So what I'm going to do is just say sign out, right? Because this is the function that I've imported. And then I pass in the authentication object. So literally just this. So once the user signs out, again, we'll want to redirect them to the home page. Slash. And that's it. That's literally it for this file, right? This is very simple. It's just a sign out, you pass in your authentication object, and you redirect them to the home page. Okay, so I'll give everyone a minute, type that down. Okay. We are running a little bit low on time, so let's move on to the home page. So now that we finished the authentication part, we want to be able to allow to-dos to be displayed on the home page. Let's see. So I've imported some Firestore functions, as you can see from the top. So collection, DB, and get docs. DB, recall that DB is the connector to our database, right? And we just want to be able to get all of the documents or the to-dos associated with like the current user, right? So we can just say we want to make a query to Firestore. And how we do that is just as follows. Right, so we call the get docs function. It'll get all the documents, so all the to-dos that are associated with our current user. And then we call collection. I'll explain what this means later. Yeah. Okay. I am typing a little bit fast, but let me just try to reformat this properly. So what this basically means is, okay, I want to get all the documents for the specific user. And in order to do that, I need to get the reference associated with all the to-dos for the user. So that's why I call this collection function here. The collection function takes in a database object, so your connection to Firestore, and then where the path where your to-dos are located. So remember that on the slide, I had a set of like, I had this diagram where the bar on the far, well, in your point of view, the far left was to-dos, the middle rectangle was your list of emails, and then the right one was just your to-do list, right? So basically, I use this path of sorts to so that we can get all the to-dos associated with the current user. Okay. So once we've done this, we want to be able to save these into a state variable so that once we store them in our state variable, we can the page will automatically re-render and show the new to-dos. Right. So let's say const to-dos, and then the only way we can get all of our to-dos is just by doing this. So we iterate over the query. By iterating, I mean it's not exactly a list, so you can't really iterate over it. You just have to use this for each method. So so the for each method accepts a function, and that function accepts the current document, right? So we're iterating over all these documents, or by document, I basically mean to do. They're kind of interchangeable. And then once we get our document, we just do to-dos.push doc, right? So we're basically just populating this to-dos list with the to-dos that we've gotten from our database. And then well, what we want to do specifically though is .id, and then doc. So what this means is I want to keep track of the to-dos ID because it'll make removal, updates, and stuff like that easier, right? And then this ... doc here is basically saying, so doc is a dictionary containing attributes, well, keys and values. I'm pretty sure most of you know what dictionaries are. What this ellipses does is, hey, I want to take all the key value pairs and just insert them into this dictionary. So if I had this one key value pair like name Sam, it would just be a new key value pair inserted into here. Does that make sense? Okay. So finally, once we've exported everything to this to-dos list, we want to be able to update our state variable so that when we do so, the page will automatically re-render and show our to-dos. So I've created this state variable at the very top of the screen that just says well, we have our to-dos list, and then we have this set to-dos function to update that state. So all you need to do is say set to-dos. And then the page should be rendered properly and show the to-dos. I want to point out this specific block of code here inside the user vector. Sorry, the cursor's in the way. So this on-off state change function, as I mentioned before, it checks to see whether the user is logged in. And the way it does this is as follows. So we call this function first, we pass in the authentication object, and it also takes in another function, and that function takes in a user. Basically, what it does is if the user is logged in, this value will be true. So, or not true. The user the user variable should just be an object containing all the attributes of the user. So, for example, their email, their user ID, and other metadata like that. So basically, it's saying if this is not null. So that means if a user is logged in, then we want to be able to call get data. So we want to get the data for the current user, right? And this is possible because auth also contains the user's data. And so we just say auth.currentUser.email. So we just want to get the email for the user and then get all the documents associated with that user. And then of course, we want to set is logged in is true. So that means we can render the to-dos, right? Because what I do. As you notice down here, I've created another conditional rendering based on whether a user is logged in or not, right? So if a user is logged in, then we want to be able to render all of our to-dos list in this to-do list component that I mentioned earlier, towards the beginning of the presentation. And we want to be able to add, give the user the ability to add their own to-dos as evidenced by this button here. Right. Otherwise, at the bottom, it'll say if the user is not logged in, then we want to render this paragraph element here saying you must be logged in order to view your to-dos. That's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying restricting access to logged in users only. So this was just the to-dos part. Let's go to the file where you can enable the functionality so that users can add their own to-dos. Again, this is just a simple form where a user can just add their title of their the name of their to-do and then the description. So I've stored the values of each field in state again. So something like this, as you saw in the other file. Basically, again, as user types, these values here will be updated, and we can use them later when we handle the user submission. So again, with forms, we want to prevent their default action so that we can take control and handle submission how we want to do it. So say e.prevent default. And then what we want to do now is we want to add the new to-do to our database. So what we do is just say await add doc. I've exported another function called add doc, which will add the to-do to the user's list of to-dos. And it's similar to last time. So to-dos auth.currentUser.email and then to-do list. So and then once we input and then added date. So this is a very long line of code, but I've separated it out into different lines. So we want to get a reference to the location where the user's to-dos are stored, and that's a long string right here: todos.auth.currentUser.email, and then /to-do list. And then what we want to pass in is again the ellipses user input. So basically, just take what's in the user input dictionary up here, and then slap those key value pairs into this new dictionary that I've created here. And then I've added an additional key called added, just so that each to-do has an associated like timestamp that it was added to, right? Just to keep track of when things were added and when things weren't added. And then finally, once we're done, we want to be able to redirect the user back to the home page so that they can see their new to-dos. Okay. How much time do we have left? We are a little bit over time, but that was pretty much what I wanted to cover. Are there any questions regarding Firebase, React, or anything of the sorts? Let me see if there's anything else actually. Okay. I see. I'm also missing something on this file. So this is app.jsx, and this is I've created a navigation bar so that at the top it'll say log in if a user isn't logged in and log out if a user is logged in. And so we want to be able to conditionally render that as well. So is logged in. So again, we want to store this in a state variable. We want to check to see if the user is logged in. If they are, we want to update the state variable so that log out is displayed. Otherwise, we just want to say login is displayed, right? And then in this use effect, we call a good friend on our state change. We pass in auth, and then we pass in the function that says if user exists, if the user is logged in, then what we want to do is update the state variable to true. Otherwise, we want to set it to false. Okay. Okay. And once we've done this, we have our conditional rendering down here. Right, so we want to say if the user isn't logged in, as I explained before, we just display login. Otherwise, we display log out. Let's see, anything else you want to cover? Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. So we are way over time, but let's see if we can oops. Yeah, that was a major typo here. What's going on? Okay. So let's just try and install our libraries and run it first. Oh boy, what does this mean? It was working, right? Okay. Okay. And how you that was really fast. Sorry. What I did was after I did npm install, I just typed in npm run dev. It's like running npm start, and then as you can see here, it's running. So let's actually visit this link and see if it works. Ouch! It doesn't. Let's see. Good friend dev tools. Not defined. What did I do? Disclaimer, by the way, I should just show the QR code just in case you guys need to leave. So feel free to take a picture of the QR code. If you guys need to go, then feel free to go. Thank you for coming. For those of you who want just to see me debug and suffer a little bit on the inside, stay behind. And again, if you have any questions on React, Firebase, or anything about Hack at UCI as an organization, just feel free to ask me. I'll be around for a little bit.